then one of the people who was the tree sitter during the December raid, because their treehouse was destroyed, they were living in just a hammock in the forest. And on January 18th, there was another really big raid, and the police ended up killing that protester. Their name was Tortuguita, or Little Turtle. And they ran an on-the-ground mutual aid fund for forest offenders. And the police said that Tortuguita had shot first and said that one of their officers was injured. But in the past couple of days, body cam footage has been released. And on the body cam footage, you can hear the police talking about how one of the cops had actually shot another cop. And it was not the forest offender who shot first, but rather friendly fire. And then police shot Tortuguita 13 times. Different police shot with different guns. And also the same day that Tortuguita was killed, there were even more people arrested with domestic terrorism. And more people got these charges at a protest in response to the killing. So at this point, I think we're up to 18 people charged with domestic terrorism. And cops actually said that they're done charging people with smaller crimes. They're only going to focus on terrorism charges and bigger charges for people. But that being said, there's still been a lot of solidarity actions across the country and a lot of successes since January 18th, and entirely new segments of the movement kind of coming out of the woodworks, which Thorne can talk about.
Yeah, so a few days after January 18th, there was a protest in downtown Atlanta where around 200 protesters had marched down Atlanta, and different people involved smashing buildings, windows of companies that fund the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is a really wide range of national corporations that are directly invested in the construction of Cop City. At this time, also, some protesters burned 2 police cars, which made national news. And also there were, I believe, 6 more protesters who were charged with domestic terrorism. So the police definitely have kept their word on charging people with pretty heinous charges. We're in sort of an unprecedented time where police are using some of the most egregious charges and tactics that I think that we've seen in a while, especially related to, just like sort of essentially a struggle in the forest. Sorry, I was going to say that I think the beauty of what we've seen is that while a lot of us are, can be scared by these charges, instead we've seen thousands and thousands of people come out in support of the Defend the Atlanta Forest movement. And different pressure campaigns emerging. Students in the universities here in Atlanta have come out to support the movement and now are pressuring local politicians, building almost like a movement of their own. We're seeing a lot of different tactics building.
So currently in the forest, the police have 30 officers working in rotation, so 10 at each given time, just guarding construction equipment. They haven't actually started construction, but they're planning on doing erosion control. And in order to guard their excavators and bulldozers, they're putting in floodlights, and they just have round-the-clock surveillance. So the police are definitely scared and freaked out. But there's also an upcoming week of action, which is a tactic that's been used throughout the movement, where there will be weeks where people are encouraged to come from outside of Atlanta and come camp in the forest. And so then at those times, there's hundreds of people camping instead of just a handful. And one of those is coming up. And it's likely that whatever construction work they're trying to do will be stopped by this week of action, and will be stopped by all these people traveling to come join the struggle and also be on the ground actually in the forest. So yeah, I guess that'll be our intro. But if people have questions or want to know more about anything, they're welcome to ask.
Voihan tähän puhua vaan.
Okei, tähän.
Joo, siis...
You can hear me? So I was thinking, how big part of the forest is already cut down? In the documentary, we saw some machines cutting some trees.
There's actually very little of the forest that has been affected. They've cut down very few trees, and most of the destruction that they've been doing, the forest, oddly enough, has a parking lot, and so had like a huge paved area where people could park their cars in order to bike through the forest or be in like the public park area. So at this point, the only real destruction that we've seen has actually been that parking lot, and they just ripped up all of the pavement. But the trees are mostly intact, and any of the work that they've done has mostly been just to get rid of infrastructure in the forest because they hadn't had any permits to do any real construction.
Yeah, construction was set to start in around May of 2021, but because of protesters since then fighting the project, it has been delayed. Now the permits have been approved for them to build Cop City. However, they currently also are in a legal battle about an appeal that was filed by a neighbor who lives right by the forest. But currently the CEO of the Police Foundation is saying that he doesn't care about this appeal, despite the fact that it went through, and legally they should not be in the forest doing any construction. He is attempting to go ahead with it anyway. But yeah, but beyond that, it's mostly been like an attempt to do erosion control and nothing else beyond that.
Yeah, hi. You mentioned the domestic terrorism charges being used more commonly in comparison to previously used like smaller charges. Do you think that that domestic terrorism is an abstract enough concept in your justice system in a way to prosecute for, in comparison to concrete smaller crimes such as sabotage and such? What do you think? Like, is it? I mean, the case for the defendants in this case.
So in Georgia, domestic terrorism has to be added on to a smaller crime. So for example, a lot of the people that were arrested have trespassing charges that then there was a domestic terrorism like additive charge. And so in order to prove domestic terrorism, they first have to prove those lesser charges. And then also for terrorism, it specifically has to be shown that they are part of an organized group working against the state. And so for some of the things like tree sitting, I think it'll be very difficult for them to prove terrorism. And a lot of people think it's extremely ridiculous that they would get these charges to begin with. But then things like the one protest where 2 cop cars are burned, I think that that's more likely that something could stick. But also if you look at past eco struggles in the US, things like Standing Rock or Line 3, there have been extreme charges, but then what people actually end up getting convicted of, if they're convicted of anything, are the very small charges, things like trespassing or like traffic obstruction or something like that. And so mostly, I think the terrorism charges are just a scare tactic, and they're trying to prevent people from joining the movement.
Yeah, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, who's the main like sort of investigators of this movement, have also attempted to lie and say that the Department of Homeland Security has called the Defend the Atlanta Forest movement a terrorist group. But Department of Homeland Security has come out and said that that is not true at all. And so we sort of have these also conflicting, I don't know, conflicting
Basically,
ideas about.
The thing that the charges were based on, or the reasoning for them being able to give out domestic terrorism charges, was this Department of Homeland Security classification that turned out to be falsified. And so it's really based on nothing. And also they're trying to, they need to prove that Defend the Atlanta Forest is like a movement that has like a hierarchical structure and is organized, which isn't the case. Like there's just a ton of random people that all participate however they want. And so there's not actually leaders for them to target. There's just there's preschoolers, there's college students, there's moms, but there's no actual organization to join.
Joo, tähän koneeseen.
As you don't have official leaders and official sort of structures, what would you say are the most used strategies to sort of disrupt the movement from inside? And has there been any targeted harassment or sort of external consequences for actors in the movement in private life and different sorts of things like that?
I would say so far, the police have been focused solely on the tree sitters or the forest defenders, who have been on the ground, in an attempt to sort of. Sorry, one second. Okay. In an attempt to almost frame this as a movement that is that centers around these core individuals, but the thousands of people involved know that that's not the case. So far, we haven't seen any repressive tactics against other actors, though in some of the hearings, they have attempted to at least dissuade the forest defenders from interacting with the social media of Defend the Atlanta Forest, which, I don't know, seems...
Well, basically, there's not actually an organization structure, but what there is are centralized platforms for people to put out calls for protest and information and different art that they make. And so that all is centralized on different blogs or social media platforms. And so I think that that's the only real target that the police have in mind, because they can't actually identify leaders within the movement, but they can identify social media platforms that are utilized. As far as harassment of individual people, fascists in the US have taken a particular interest in this movement. And so there's this one guy, his name is Andy No on Twitter. Elon Musk retweeted stuff that he said about the forest, and they've been doxing people. So even in the documentary that you saw, they'll take screenshots from that and dox people, or especially the people who are arrested. Their mugshots are all shown to millions of people by fascists, and all of their personal information has been released. So at this point, people are, I think, more worried about, as far as harassment goes, being harassed by fascists rather than police, because I think the police are kind of clueless.
So how did the killing of the Tortuguita affect the movement? Did people get scared and leave, or did it attract more people who were angered, or yeah, how did it change the dynamics?
Yeah. I think mostly it angered a lot of people and actually brought to light this movement and the brutality that we're seeing against the movement in an attempt to protect these corporate entities. A lot of people have come out now in support of the movement after the murder of Tortuguita, because I think people can see through whatever, I don't know.
Well, also Tort was indigenous, was like indigenous and Hispanic, and also was killed very close to the time that Tyree Nichols was murdered by the police. And so I think that Tort's death really showed people the connection between environmental movements and anti-police movements, and how Defend the Forest is really a combination of those two. And this is also the first time that, or people are saying that this is the first time that police have killed an environmental protester while they were protesting. So like at Standing Rock, they did shoot somebody at close range with like some sort of explosive and blew their arm off. And so we've definitely seen violence towards environmental protesters, but this is the first time that they've actually killed one. And also, like, they killed this person while they were sleeping in a hammock, and this person was also indigenous. And so I think it really angered a lot of people, and it also got like way more national media coverage. So a lot of people that didn't even know about the movement know about it now. And are definitely sending their support and planning solidarity actions. There were vigils after Tort was killed in over 40 cities, not just in the US, but also internationally. So yeah, it definitely brought a lot of people out.